Greetings and welcome to the third International Disabilities Rights Affirmation Conference, sponsored by Virtual Ability. It's an international panel of citizens from countries around the world. They are not disability or policy experts, but we can learn a great deal by thinking about the information they're going to share with us today. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself, I'm a web developer and technological explorer who regards accessibility as a key component of any design. I'll be your Australian moderator for this session. Now on to our panelists. Hailing from Canada is Life Skills Worker. She is a case manager for clients with ABI or acquired brain injury. She instructs the Life Skills program to both clients and students. Our panelists representing Malaysia will be Wakilun, who enjoys exploring and taking photographs in Second Life. In her real life, she's a writer, publisher, and writing teacher. Panelist Kiri Mumi Tigerpaw is a sociological professor interested in studying virtual world communities, foundations, and self-avatar relationships. She created Kira Japan ASL. Susu Thompson, or Susan, is Director of Occupational Therapy Doctoral Program and Professor at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. She has an extensive experience in instructing in Second Life. The most active ongoing project for Susan and her occupational therapy graduate students is the Garden of Healthy Aging, a resource on health and wellness, a key area of interest in health literacy. Now we'll run robin fashion. The panelists will have prepared answers to some of the questions about disability rights in their own countries, using publicly available sources for information. Again, remember that our fellow citizens are not experts, but presenters at other conference sessions. When we have gone through all the prepared questions, then we can open the floor for your comments and questions. Please hold your questions until the end so our panelists prepare their responses. Also remember that not all panelists' first language is English, so please allow a little bit of time for language processing. Let's begin with the first question. What is the population of your country? What is the estimate number of your people with disabilities in your country? What percentage is that of the total population of your country?
The estimated population of Japan in July 2012 was 100,368,088 persons.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what order we were talking in, but I'll answer. Yeah, just focus. Yeah, so I'll answer for Malaysia since there's a silence there. The estimated population of Malaysia in 2013 is 29.8 million, according to the Statistics Department. There are no reliable statistics on disabled persons. Registration is voluntary. As of March 2013, 458,000 disabled persons are registered with the Department of Social Welfare. The United Nations and World Health Organization estimates that 10% of any population is disabled, so the real number could be much higher, about 2.8 million perhaps.
About 5,136,500 persons in Japan are described as disabled, about 4.3% of the total Japanese population. Of these, 3,176,500 are labeled physically disabled, 390,000 are labeled mentally retarded, and 1,570,000 are labeled mentally disabled. Of course, this is only by surveys, and there is a growing population of seniors in Japan who have, one way or another, some physical or mental limitations.
In 2012, the United States population was 313.9 million people. And in 2010, 54 million Americans were living with a disability, which is 19% of the population.
Answers to given questions. Number 1, According to the government census of April 2013, the population of Canada is estimated at 35,141,542. The complete census for 2013 has not been published yet, so the most recent publication for the number of people with disabilities in Canada was done in 2006. There were approximately 4.4 million people in Canada who reported a disability, which was 14.3% of the population at that time. The largest age group that was reported to have disabilities was the ages between 55 and 64, with a disability rate of 22.8%.
I'm sorry, this is Susan. I had forgotten to put the text in. Thank you, Gentle, for reminding me about that. I just didn't hit the return button.
Alright, so I just want to check, has every panelist answered that particular question? Sorry, I'm just the moderator, not a panelist for this discussion. Okay, so moving on to question 2. Give a brief description of the healthcare system in your countries, starting with Susan.
Currently, most Americans either have private insurance, Medicare or Medicaid, through public programs, or are uninsured. The Affordable Care Act is gradually making health care more accessible. By 2014, all Americans will have some form of access to affordable health insurance through tax credits, a marketplace of health plans, and expanded Medicaid program for low-income individuals and families.
Evander Kimmy, would you mind answering the question, please?
We have a nationalized healthcare system and public social security system. Healthcare is based on an insurance system, unlike Canada, where it's based primarily on tax. It's highly accessible. In addition, each city has its system of annual checkup, about $10 for all residents. If the cost became too expensive, there's also an additional reimbursement system. However, due to the high quality of medicine, the government suffers budget problems, and it is the matter of national debates about how to sustain the quality of nationalized health care.
In Canada, we have government-subsidized health care system for basic health care coverage, but it does not cover dental, and not all eyeglasses or special lenses and so on are covered. Each province has their own rules and regulations. There are also some specialized services, private clinics, and private insurance companies as well. Some companies or organizations provide their employees with extended medical coverage, which include dental and eyeglasses and specialized services, and so on.
Malaysia's healthcare system is divided into two sectors. The government provides basic universal healthcare. Disabled persons holding a special identification card are exempted from charges on treatment and commonly prescribed medicine in government hospitals. Alongside this public sector provision, there is private healthcare system, which includes some excellent hospitals and specialist centres, many of them with overseas links. These are expensive for most Malaysians, though. Many people have health insurance, but the disabled are unable to obtain health medical insurance very often.
Now to the third question. What legal protections do people with disabilities have in your country? Please name the laws and give dates when they were enacted. Same with Susan.
The Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA of 1990, protects American people with disabilities, guaranteeing equal opportunities, and prevents discrimination in public accommodations, employment, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. This act was preceded by other legislation, and that includes a number of laws: Telecommunications Act of 1934, Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, the Carrier Access Act of 1986, Voting Accessibility for the Elderly and Handicapped, National Voter Registration Act, Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act, Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and others.
The framework of protecting people with disabilities is related to the constitutional right of protecting a basic quality of living for all citizens. In addition, national medical care and social security system are important frameworks. Well, perhaps you would like to know more specifics. There was the Law for Welfare of Physically Disabled Persons, 1949, Law for the Welfare of Mentally Retarded Persons, 1960, Law for Employment, Promotion, etc. of the Disabled, 1960, revised in 1976, Disabled Persons Fundamental Law, 1993, Law for Promoting Business that facilitates the use of communications and broadcast services by the physically disabled to make these services more convenient and more accessible to disabled persons, 1993, the Act on Buildings Accessible and Usable for the Elderly and Physically Disabled, in 1994, Mental Health and Welfare Law of Mentally Disabled Persons, 1995, the Government Action Plan for Persons with Disabilities, a 7-year normalization strategy, 1996 to 2003. There are still ongoing efforts to reform older post-war laws right now.
In Canada, we have protection for all people with disabilities, which are under the laws of the Constitution Act of 1867, the Canadian Human Rights Act 1976-1977, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedom Act of 1982, which are all covered under the Constitution Act of 1867.
The laws, the Uniform Buildings Bylaw 34A under the Streets Drainage and Building Act has a requirement that buildings approved after the bylaw came into force must comply with the Malaysian standard MS 1183 and MS 1184, and those that were already approved must comply with the requirement within 3 years, and there's a link that you can check for that. And then the Persons with Disability Act came in to effect in 2008, came into force since 7th of July 2008, and there's a link there to read more if you want to. Done.
Now for a more controversial question. With a mental and developmental disability as well protected as people with physical disabilities.
In the United States, the ADA defines an individual with disability as a person who has physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. A person who has a history or record of such an impairment, or a person who's perceived by others as having such an impairment. While specific disabilities are not named, mental and developmental disabilities are protected in the ADA as well as the other federal laws mentioned before. Done.
I'd like to now ask Kira Marie to speak up.
According to Article 2 of Disabled Persons Fundamental Law 1993, disabled persons means persons whose daily life in Japanese society is substantially limited over the long term due to a physical disability, mental retardation, or mental disability.
In Canada, we have protections for people with all disabilities, including people with mental and developmental disabilities, which are under the laws of the Constitution Act of 1867. The Canadian Human Rights Act 1976 to 1977, and the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms Act of 1982, which are all covered under the Constitution Act of 1867.
Facilities for the physically disabled are insufficient, and facilities for mental disorders are even more limited. Most companies will not hire people with physical disabilities unless they need to or desire to showcase their commitment to the less abled. You do find blind or movement impaired people working in companies, but usually as telephone operators and such. Registration with the Welfare Department means that non-working disabled get an allowance of 150 ringgit per month. That's about $40 US. If they're working and get a salary below 1,500 ringgit Malaysian a month, that's about $400 US. They receive a monthly allowance of $300 US, or about 75 US dollars. Okay, done.
Do most children with disabilities attend classes with non-disabled classmates?
In the United States, this depends on the nature and severity of the disability. The IDEA mandates that between the ages of 3 and 21, child or adolescent must be provided free and appropriate public school education. Students are to be taught within the least restrictive environment. This law has been in effect since 1975 and has been strengthened by the 1997 reauthorization of IDEA and the 2002 No Child Left Behind. I have a few more statistics here. Just to include, because I think they're interesting. According to the National Center for Education, of all students with disabilities, 59.4% spent less than 21% of their school time outside the general class. 20.7% spent 21 to 60% of time outside the general class, and 14.6% spent more than 60% of their time outside the general class. Only a small percentage of students with disabilities were in separate schools, hospitals, and facilities. In fact, in fall 2009, some 95% of 6 to 21-year-old students with disabilities were served in regular schools. Done.
Jenny, could you answer for us?
Sure. Unfortunately, inclusive education for children with disabilities is relatively underdeveloped in Japan, even though the idea of inclusiveness and normalization became more influential since 1970. As a consequence, by 2006, there were 1,006 special schools for children with disabilities, separate schools for those who were deaf, blind, had intellectual disabilities, the largest number of schools, physical motor disabilities, or health impairments that would prevent them from going to regular schools. Giving some form of education in these schools is compulsory, and duties for parents and education is widely available for children with various disabilities. Only a fraction of 1% of all children of school age were exempted from education because of their disabilities. However, parents who prefer to educate their children to attend ordinary neighborhood schools often have to struggle hard with schools to get permission to attend ordinary classes. This is an area of challenge for Japanese communities. Done.
I'll go next then, shall I? Okay, that depends on the evaluation by the education department whether disabled students can study in mainstream schools or in special education schools. A majority of mainstream schools do not have accessible facilities like toilets and lifts and trained support staff for disabled students. Some schools do have a special section for children with disabilities where classes are small and the teachers trained, but the disabled children may be grouped together, whatever their age, because of limited facilities. The children who succeed in government schools generally do so because they have supportive parents and friends. In addition to the schools which take disabled children, the government has set up daycare centres in rural areas where parents can place the child or adult for the morning. These are called PDKs, Pusat Dalam Community, or just Community Centre, run by the Welfare Department. The facilities and qualifications of the supervisors are minimal, but at least there are these facilities. Done.
Okay, I'm just relaying information that Life School Worker is currently crashed, so we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and that question So the next question is, do most people with disabilities live with their families in special facilities or in hospitals? And in the U.S., 60% of people aged 25 to 64 with a non-severe disability live in married coupled families. Corresponding rates are 68% for those without disabilities and 50% for people with severe disabilities. 23% of people with a non-severe disability live alone or with non-relatives. This compares with 28% of those with a severe disability and 19% without a disability. Done.
You hear me?
According to the Survey on Physically Disabled Persons of 1996, about 9% of physically disabled children under 18 live in institutions such as boarding schools for blind children, and about 5% of physically disabled persons over 18 live in institutions. The others live in the community included in this category, physically disabled. The others living in community included in this category are those with motor dysfunctions of limbs and body, those who are blind, those who have hearing and speech disabilities, and those with internal organ disorders. There are day facilities for adults with limited mental facilities. Families are strong in Japan, and they tend to take care of their children at home.
Oops. Sorry. In addition to the schools which take disabled children, am I on the right answer? Oh no. Sorry, give me a sec. Most disabled persons stay with their families, but of course this depends on the severity of their disability and financial issues. Again, there's no reliable data on the numbers. There are a few centres that provide total care. They are insufficient for the disabled population in the country. Many of the centres are either daycare centres or, like the one that I know about at the Kelantan Foundation for the Disabled, it's a rehabilitation centre where the disabled come for specific help. Foundation has care units that go out to outlying areas to provide their services, be it therapy or welfare services, and the link is there. This is just in one of the states in Malaysia. There are residential institutions for disabled persons funded by the government or run by NGOs. A couple of examples: Bethany Home near Telok Intan in Perak State in the north of Malaysia has an outreach program where the disabled who have jobs stay together in a house with a supervisor. Most facilities are run as charities by private bodies. Done.
Life still says, I'm so sorry everyone for crashing.
Technology happens. The current question is, are there populations within your country that have specific health or disability issues? Sorry, I meant that's the next question, sorry.
Okay, this is a long answer because we have many populations in the United States at greater risk. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, okay for it.
Shall I go ahead or someone else?
Okay. Please go ahead on your question.
Okay. All right. Well, there are many populations within the United States, and one big population that has greater disparities is the African American population, and non-Hispanic blacks have the highest age-adjusted rates of obesity. Also have higher rates of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, and experience higher incidence and mortality rates from many cancers. Then Hispanics also have greater disparities. And with Hispanics, 14% have been diagnosed with diabetes compared with 8% of whites. Higher rates of end-stage renal disease caused by diabetes, and 50% more likely to die from diabetes as non-Hispanic whites. Also, Hispanic women contract cervical cancer at twice the rate of white women. Then, looking at Pacific Islanders and Native Hawaiians, in comparison to other groups, Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders have higher rates of smoking, alcohol consumption, and obesity. Also has little access to cancer prevention and control. The state of Hawaii found that the diabetes rate for Native Hawaiians was twice that of the white population, and that Native Hawaiians are also more than 5.7 times as likely as whites living in Hawaii to die from diabetes. This group also are 30% more likely to be diagnosed with cancer compared to non-Hispanic whites. And then looking at Asian populations in the United States, Asian Americans suffer disproportionately from certain types of cancer, tuberculosis, and hepatitis B. Vietnamese American women, for example, have cervical cancer rates 5 times those of white women. Southeast Asian refugees are at a significant risk for post-traumatic stress disorder associated with trauma experienced before and after immigration to the United States. So you can see that there's a lot of depth to that question. Done.
In Canada, there are subpopulations that have specific health issues or concerns and/or disabilities, which are our Native population, have severe addictions and alcoholism, and some have various disabilities. Minority groups, as well as in urban, rural, remote, and isolated areas, there are fewer programs and services that are provided. They are limited in these areas. For example, there are fewer physicians to be able to provide adequate health care, as well as education systems. Social services and disability programs and services are less available, or they are limited in these regions. Also, underserving of special needs groups have fewer services available to them in some locations. These groups are women, children, youth, disabled persons, immigrants, seniors, people of Aboriginal origin, farmers, maritime fishermen. Each province has their own unique health issues.
Of course, there is a disadvantaged population in terms of healthcare in Japan too. However, the most serious problem is actually related to demographic trends. The nationalized healthcare system is quite different from that of, say, American systems. It is related to the growing senior population. The increase of older people also means increase of people with physical or mental disabilities who have healthy lives. For example, increasing of post-stroke patients, those who undergo regular artificial dialysis, and of course, cognitive problems for seniors. More than 22% of Japan's population is over 65 years old. It is in part due to the life expectancy of Japanese people, which is very long. Since Japanese national healthcare system is based on public insurance systems, the aging population also means that less young people are paying for public insurance. The low-income young people also have a problem of not paying insurance, and when they become old or with sudden health problems, they suddenly realize that they're not a part of the national health system. However, the good policies toward people with disabilities are in fact also very friendly with seniors with declining health. Hence, I hope to see the collaboration between advocates for disabilities and advocates for older people. Done.
Sorry, I jumped in too early there a moment ago. But I couldn't find information about differences among different populations. But there is a very high level of heroin addiction in the general population in Malaysia, especially among the Malays, one of the three main racial groups. And obesity is a growing issue in Malaysia as well. Done.
Okay, on to our final question. Has your country signed or ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities? If so, were any issues raised during that process? If not, what are the issues preventing this?
The U.S. signed the treaty in 2009, but it failed to be passed and ratified by the Senate, and it was voted on in December 2012. Though President Obama is in favor of it, the country is split on the treaty for a number of reasons. The treaty was signed by the U.S. in 2009, but Senate approval is needed for ratification, and a vote last year did not garner the two-thirds majority. Supporters say the treaty would not require any changes to U.S. law, but would allow the nation to take a leadership role internationally on disability rights, while also helping to ensure that Americans with disabilities are protected when they travel abroad, in much the same way that they're under domestic law. More than 300 disability organizations united last year to back the measure. Done.
hearing me?
Japan signed the UN Convention on the 28th of September 2007. It has not been ratified. A shame. The Japanese government has a strong plan to ratify the treaty, but it claims that the government first tries to reform a complex set of laws related to disabilities in order to make changes realistic. A variety of Japanese disability laws in particular. The education is a complex process. There have been a series of new laws emerging in the last few years up to now.
Canada was one of the first countries to sign the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and signed on March 30th, 2007. The Government of Canada consulted provincial and territorial governments, civil society, the general public, and they also sought the views of self-governing Aboriginal groups on how ratification of the convention might affect their communities. Also, to ensure and provide provision for persons with disabilities, reaffirming civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, and ethnic rights set out in international law. Then,
Malaysia signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 8th of April 2008 on the 19th of July 2010 with reservations, but did not sign the optional protocol. My informant, my friend, told me, I believe one of the reservations about this was Article 15, freedom from torture, the excuse being Malaysia has capital punishment. Because the optional protocol was not signed, disabled persons cannot seek redress from the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in the event of non-compliance with the CRPD. Okay, done.
I'd like to thank our panel members for taking the time to both be here and in researching the questions. I'd like to thank the audience for sharing in this experience.
Thank you.
If you have any questions, please ask them privately.
This is Gentle. I also want to thank our members of the panel, LaQuacia, social workers, Karamini, and Souza. Thank you for sharing information about your countries, especially for those of you who were sharing in a second language. That's always a trick. And I think from your studies, you now probably know more about disability issues in your countries than most people there. And I think it's really important for all of us to maintain sort of a worldwide perspective. We think we understand our own country and we don't understand it that well. We sure understand other countries. I want to thank Capillo for moderating the session. That's a skill that is necessary to help the panel move along forwards. I also want to thank our audience members. You stuck it out to the last of the sessions, and you were also very patient for us. We had a little bit of a setup issue with this. We still did well. If you learned something today, I certainly encourage you to put something into the blog so that our panelists know that you were listening. There is not a quiz, but it helps them to know. It has been interesting. I mean, it really has. I again want to recognize iSky Silverweb for her efforts in bringing this all together. She can now go and take a little bit of rest because the cleanup, luckily, is a lot easier after a virtual conference. Lady Slipper and Kara have been working all day. They have been really gracious about greeting our guests. And if you look above the backdrop, you'll see several flags that show for the participants in the whole conference, the different countries that are represented here. Yes, great help. Eliza and Lady Slipper, on the last moment, you were reading today, and I think that was something that we're really appreciative. These two also do, often when they've got it scheduled, they do poetry readings together. So they're a good couple to work for reading. And finally, I want to thank once more Dusa, Dragonash, and Metaverse Television for filming today's events, for creating archival copies of the different sessions. We will get that information out to you soon. And this concludes the 2013 International Disability Rights Affirmation Conference. Thank everyone for attending, and I hope you enjoyed all your learning. Good night, everyone.